Hi, I'm Daniel, I'm a sleep physician, and if you have insomnia, this channel is for you. In this episode, we're going to read an email from Caleb and see how a worry cycle is feeding his paradoxical insomnia. We're then going to see how this worry cycle also feeds insomnia in general, but also the subcomponents of insomnia, such as the tension, the headache, the energy blast, the zaps, the jolting awake, and finally, how to break the cycle to sleep better. Super nice having you back here. Hope you're doing really well today. And if you're new to the channel, then a big welcome to you, of course. Now, two things before we kind of jump into this email from Caleb. Firstly, I just want to share with you how I got, how I was made aware of this worry cycle. It was, in fact, my wife reading about picky eating. She saw this worry cycle applied to picky eating and said, "Isn't this just like insomnia?" And I was like, yes, this is exactly like what happens in insomnia. So that's how I learned of it, and we'll see how I think it's really important. Secondly, I posted this video a couple of days ago about how, you still trust your brain enough to wake you up, so you should trust it to like regulate your sleep. And then I got this email today from Caleb who said, "Oh, the irony, because I don't trust my brain to wake me up. I'm afraid I'm going to end up in some kind of trance sometimes." And I emailed him back and gave him some reassurance. But that's how this email that we're going to talk about today came about. So let's jump right in here. It is from a day ago, and Caleb, who, by the way, is Caleb from episode 109. If you want the backstory there, do check out 109. Let's read here. So Caleb says as follows: "I'm still frightened by the fact that I have no way of comprehending how much I've slept, and on many nights even feeling like I haven't slept at all and basically just lay there and went into a trance where I became unaware of my surroundings. Not only can I not tell when I'm sleeping, it's hard for me to tell exactly when I wake up too. I sometimes feel like I may have slept some, but then woke up and was awake for a while without realizing. Suddenly my awareness comes to me and I think to myself, oh, I'm awake. I know it sounds very strange, but it also is very hard for me to explain. The fact that this is still going on though, and has been going on for so long, scares me for multiple reasons. One being that I'm afraid this is never going to be better, that my body, mind, brain, or whatever it is has changed and it's never going to revert back to the way it was when I was sleeping normal. I used to drift off, fall heavily asleep, and have dreams throughout the night, and instantly after the dream ended, I woke up. I would realize I was awake immediately. It's not so simple now. I fear that my brain has gotten screwed up by my chaotic sleep pattern, and my biggest fear of all is that one night I will finally sleep, but my mind will be so confused by the spontaneous nature of my sleep that it will just malfunction or give out, and it won't wake me up." I'm just going to end there and say, and just mention two positive things that Caleb mentioned initially, which was one, I do sleep. He knows that he does sleep, and two, I can function decently during the day, sometimes even great, with whatever sleep I get. So starting there, and just a few comments there, just kind of words of reassurance that I may not have put in my email to you, Caleb. Your brain cannot become like messed up or screwed up or like malfunction so that it can never become normal again. Like that just doesn't happen. It's just, as I wrote to you, you're stuck in a worry cycle. And it was this, like when I read this and I wrote to you, like you're stuck in a worry cycle, made me think that I should really talk about this more. So here's what's going on. Like Caleb realizes that he does sleep, and that he can function pretty well during the day, but is really worried about the fact that he doesn't really know how much he sleeps, and it's hard for him to tell if he's awake or asleep sometimes. But ultimately, he is, feeling pretty good during the day. So you can read out from the email here, from what I just read, that there's a lot of worry, anxiety, and fear and preoccupation, which then leads us to this worry cycle. As you see it here, I can't see it in front of me with you, so I'm just going to pull it up here. So let's look at this, and we're going to do like two exchanges here. Instead of feeding challenge, when it says feeding, think sleep or sleeping challenge, and when it says child here, think insomnia. And then let's just start from kind of the top part where it says feeding challenge. So think of it as it starts with a sleeping challenge. So for some reason, you're having some kind of problem with sleep, some kind of sleep problem, right? And then if we forward the spiral, that leads to worry. You have also lack of information, lack of support, and poor advice. That then leads to a counterproductive feeding practice, which then, in our case, a counterproductive sleeping practice. So for example, the classic one that, you try to go to bed earlier, try to get more sleep, etc. Now that builds pressure, you're doing something that you hope will work and make things better, but then that leads to resistance from the insomnia. Then that leads to more pressure. You're trying more to make things better. You worry more, and then that gives way to more resistance, more pressure, more resistance, more worry, etc., etc. So the whole thing just spirals out of control and becomes worse. Now, what is, of course, the important thing to note here is that, in going back to Caleb's example, Caleb knows that he sleeps. He's feeling pretty good during the day. The problem is the worrying and the preoccupation. That's what feeds the whole thing. If Caleb was able to just not worry, then the whole thing would resolve. So, his email made me think of this worry cycle. Now, what kind of the insight I had then was that this worry cycle applies to what he has, paradoxical insomnia, where you have a hard time telling if you're awake or asleep. It feeds that. This worry cycle feeds the paradoxical insomnia. It feeds the typical psychophysiological insomnia as well, where people are just worried about their insomnia, and that makes it hard to sleep. But it also feeds all the kind of subcomponents of insomnia that are so common. For example, the jolting awake. The jolting awake per se is not dangerous. It is frightening, but not dangerous. And if you wouldn't worry about it, it would happen less. The more you worry about the jolting awake, the more you think about it, the more preoccupied you with it, the more it happens. Same thing with the energy blast that a lot of people have when they go to bed. Same thing with the kind of weird tensions and and what else can we say? The tension, what are some other common symptoms? Like the tightness, the tingling, all those things too. The more attention, the more you worry about them, the more they occur. So this worry cycle applies to everything. And I thought this was an insight that I just thought about this. I thought that this was an important insight, so I really wanted to share it. Now, most importantly, of course, is how do you break it? Caleb's example, how do you break it for paradoxical insomnia? How do you break it for insomnia in general? How do you break it for the jolting awake? How do you break it for all the other subcomponents of insomnia? And I asked Pexi Lopez, the Win Lopez, by the way, on a comment today, what are your advice? How do you stop worrying? How do you break that worry cycle? And he said that, after 13 years of having insomnia, he was kind of just so fed up that he said, screw it. I'm not going to think about it more. I don't care if I sleep or not. And then started sleeping better. And so that approach kind of works when you just decide not to worry about it. It can work. In his case it worked, but it took 13 years to get to that point. There must be a quicker way. And this is where I'm I have a thought about this that you probably heard me say before. There may be a better one, and I will try to figure out if there is something more effective. But what I think is the most effective one is replacement. You generally speaking, you cannot decide not to worry about something. That just doesn't work. The classical example that I always bring up is if somebody tells you not to think of a pink elephant, guess what? You think of a pink elephant, right? So you have to replace it. You have to become preoccupied with something else. Just come up with something that you can do that keeps you so busy that you are not thinking about your paradoxical insomnia, your insomnia in general, your jolting awake, your energy blasts, your zapping feelings, your tensions, all those things. And that, I believe, is the most effective way to break the worry cycle and have improvement in whatever subcomponent symptom you have or insomnia in itself. A lot of these things were just kind of are not well articulated today. This is just an emerging thought. Hopefully I'll be able to express it better in the future, but I think it was still important. I wanted to share it. So before I let you go, a couple of shout outs here. Jonathan, I did get this book Wrecked, and I'm excited to read it. I think it'll bring a lot of value. I want to say thank you to Michael, who wrote me a nice email, not with any particular question, just saying that he was doing better, and 2 things he had found that helped him was just spending less time in bed and being less concerned and afraid. 2 big insights. And then Audra, I'm sorry I didn't get to do that podcast with you Sunday, but we will do it on Friday, right? Do we say Thursday or Friday? I have it in my calendar, so don't worry, we're going to do it that day, whatever we decided. And then finally, thanks Pexi Lopez for all your insights. There is something I really want to talk about tomorrow, which is related to a recent comment. And what was it again? Oh yeah, how insomnia ends. How insomnia ends. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, if nothing else comes up. So I know this is a longer video. Thanks for your patience, and hope to have you back here tomorrow. If anybody has a question, by the way, leave a comment or email me, daniel@insomniainsight.co. Until then, take it easy.